Okay, perfect. All right, hi folks, I'm just going to get started right away. We have a lot to cover today in a short amount of time, so I'll just get going and we'll let folks sign in kind of as we introduce the session. So thanks for joining us this morning for the Zero Carbon Step Code webinar. Next slide there, please. All right, so my name is Jenna. I am a Built Environment Initiatives Coordinator with the Community Energy Association. I'm here today with Mark Bernhardt from Bernhardt Contracting, and we're just here to give you an overview of the Zero Carbon Step Code in BC and how you can apply it to your new builds. So thanks again for joining us. So I'd just like to start the session off with a territory acknowledgement. So Community Energy Association, we acknowledge that we carry out our work on the traditional and ancestral territories of Indigenous peoples. So through our commitment to truth and reconciliation, we support First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities in taking climate action and reaching their goals of energy sovereignty, security, and resilience. So I'd just like to begin our session this morning by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples from all of the diverse and beautiful places we're joining from. I know we have folks from across BC, but I'm joining from what is now called Nelson, but for thousands of years has been the traditional homelands of the Snaiks Nation, the Silks Nation, and the Ktunaxa Nation, and is home to the Métis and many diverse Indigenous peoples. So I'd just like to acknowledge with deep respect and gratitude that it is in thanks to their generations of stewardship that we're able to enjoy these mountains, forests, and waters in the way that we do. The next slide there. Perfect. So who are we? Community Energy Association, our CEA, is a registered charity and nonprofit. We're committed to accelerating bold action by local governments and Indigenous communities related to climate and energy. So we have an unwavering commitment to our clients to provide services and support on their journeys from awareness to plans through to implementation. So what does that have to do with offering learning opportunities for building professionals? Well, in BC, buildings are the third highest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. So for us, building better is climate action. And then just the following slide. Perfect. So today, this webinar is brought to you kind of a joint effort of the Kootenay Clean Energy Transition, or KCET, and BAL North, or Building a Legacy North. So KCET is a project that was developed to address shifts happening in the energy efficiency, renewable energy, and home comfort space. So through KCET, we want to help Kootenay and boundary communities prepare for a more energy efficient and healthy future through training and capacity building sessions like this one. So thanks to the generous support of the organizations you see listed at the bottom of this slide, we're offering this free workshop as part of that piece. And Building a Legacy North. So since 2021, BAL North initiative is a collaboration of CEA and the Canadian Home Builders Association, or CHBA, of Northern BC. It supports high performance building through implementation of the BC Energy Step Code and Zero Carbon Step Code in Northern BC. So Building a Legacy provides training and support for the building industry and local governments around high performance building in cold climates in both new construction and retrofit. All right, and just that following slide. Perfect. So CEA, we're committed to providing educational opportunities to everyone, regardless of their existing knowledge or experience. It's really important to us that we provide a safe and open space for attendees to engage and participate. So this slide is just an overview of some guidelines we'd like folks to adhere to over the next 90 minutes or so. So most importantly, please respect each other and our speaker, and please don't hesitate to ask us any questions you have. We're happy to address them. So have a look through that slide. I'm just going to cover a couple other housekeeping items before I pass things over to Mark. So we're going to save all of your questions until the end. The first hour of today's session will be Mark's presentation, and then we have a 30 minutes designated to questions. So if you do have questions as we go through the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll go through the questions with you at the end. You'll also have an opportunity in that discussion period to raise your hand and ask your question directly if you prefer. So as you would have noticed when you logged in, we are recording this session and we'll be sharing it out with all registrants. We'll also be sharing it out on CEA's Built Environment webpage. And I did send a copy of the presentation slides to everyone on the call already. We will be following up with a link to this recording and another copy of the presentation slides there. For those of you collecting continuing professional development points through BC Housing, this session has been Pre-approved for 1 point. So I'll be sending out a confirmation of attendance email for those of you who stay on for the full duration of today's webinar. All right, so that's it for me. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Mark Bernhardt. So Mark is the president of Bernhardt Contracting, CEO of Energy Code Solutions. He's a registered energy advisor and passive house consultant. He serves on several provincial code committees and is CHBA BC vice president and past chair of the technical committee. So over the past few years, Mark has spent much of his time helping other builders gear up for step code and high performance building. So sufficient to say he has an incredible wealth of knowledge on today's topic. So thanks so much for being here with us, Mark, and I'll pass things over to you. Oh, and you're just muted there.
Look at that, muting myself right off the bat. Great way to start a Friday webinar. Good stuff. Good thing it's the end of the week. Yeah, thanks for having me, everyone. Thanks, Jana, for the introduction. Good to see a lot of people, a lot of familiar names in the list here. So happy to see you guys again. What we're going to talk about today is a bit of a zero carbon step code 101. So for those that maybe haven't seen it before, we'll take it through kind of step by step a bit and sort of look at all the details. For those that have seen me talk about this before, this might be a bit of review, but maybe we can get into some details that we haven't seen before and stuff. We've got some case studies at the end and some data in the middle, so hopefully some good stuff to talk about here. So to get on it here. So zero carbon step code. Let's see what's going on. I gotta find the right button here now too. There we go. So I don't know what part I cut out, so I'm just gonna rewind here and probably say it better anyways. So energy step code has been mandatory now in the province for some time, and at the middle step. So by now, basically all builders should be familiar with this and have been using this. And really, this tackles one part of our journey as a building industry here. And it tackles really only the energy side of things. Now, energy is a big piece because these two codes do go hand in hand. And when we imagine the energy use of a building, a normal home, right, has a cycle, right? You'll peak up during the day or during the evening when you're cooking. You might have a cold snap, and the peak load of the building gets really high. So your energy profile might look something like this. This is not real data. I just drew this line with a pencil, but you get the idea, right? We can imagine what that would be in sort of a normal home. A high performance home, like a step 5 energy step code home, will look something more like this. And that has some pretty big benefits for us as a province, us as a society, right? Now, all of a sudden, we can spend quite a bit less on our grid, right? So if we imagine, the peak cold snap of a regular house is using 971 gigawatts, not a real new unit of measure, but more fun. And the house that's using less is using half that, right? Now we have to transmit, we have to generate half the energy. And particularly problematic is those peak loads, right? We see in the news lately that Alberta was having brownouts and things like that. And that's because of peak loads. It's typically not because of the base loads of things. And so that's what energy step code is dealing with. And it really needs to go hand in hand, though, with the zero carbon step code, because energy step code deals with energy, but not emissions. And so the second piece of this environmental, code sort of push here is the emissions code, and that's where we need the zero carbon step code. And it's a little bit when energy step code first came out, it was a little bit awkward because it's sort of marketed as like sort of the environmental solution to building. However, if you can have a step 5 energy code house and have a huge amount of emissions still, because you can hit that with a fossil fuel burning heating system. And then if you had a lowest possible step house, as long as it was an all electric system, its emissions were still a fraction of what that highest level gas burning house was. And so that was a little awkward, right? It didn't really solve the problem of the emissions and therefore, the climate change parts of it. But we do need them both, because if we're going to successfully electrify and reduce those overall emissions, we do need to reduce our energy use as well to make that a practical, all-encompassing solution. So they go hand in hand. It's not one or the other; it's both, and we do need them both. So now on to the zero carbon step code. What is it? Why is it? And such here. So if you're reading your code forms, as I'm sure many of you do for light reading in the evening on a Friday night, you will see there are 3 categories to choose from. Much like other codes we have now, that if you're watching codes in Canada, you'll notice that almost all of them are going now to a performance outcome rather than a prescriptive. And so what I mean by that is, back in the day, if you had a building code, it would say you must have three nails in this 2x4 to hold the wall up. But now we're much more going to, the wall must stand up. And that is the goal, right? It must be, it must be such and such a strong, and it must stand up. How you make it stand up and be such and such a strong is somewhat up to you. And it's the same sort of idea with the energy codes. We're not saying exactly how you get there, but we do have a method for measuring what it is and whether or not you've achieved it. So the way we measure the zero carbon step code, we have these 3 categories. We have a total GHG, that's a greenhouse gas, for anybody who's into acronyms there. Total GHG per year, so we're looking at the entire GHG that your house produces per year. That's what we're looking at there. We have a GHG per meter with a max cap. So if we take that total greenhouse gas and we divide it per meter of square in your house, so that's an intensity rating. How much GHG per meter squared does your house use with a maximum cap? So you can't go over a certain maximum. These 2 are quite different in which type of house they will favor. So a total GHG, you can imagine a very small house would have an advantage there. Small house, small GHG sort of thing. A bigger house or a large multi-unit place will have a higher GHG, and there we might want to go to a GHG per meter and have that type of housing favor that. But we don't want to have that mansion that is gigantic being able to get away scot-free, so we have the max cap. That's what the max cap is for, is to sort of prevent that lakefront mansion from getting away with kind of just willy-nilly pollution. The third category is a prescriptive option. The prescriptive option, and I'll talk a bit more about this in detail coming up, is quite a bit more strict, actually, because it says you will use this for your heating and you will use that for your hot water sort of thing. It dictates the fuel type, and it covers more than what the other 2 do, because the other 2 are based on modeling. The prescriptive is based on what's connected to what. And the modeling doesn't quite include as many things as the prescriptive. And you'll see the graphic on the side there. There are 4 levels. So EL1, which they call measure only, is basically status quo. We're just measuring, and then it goes up to a moderate, EL2, EL3 strong, EL4 zero. And as we go through here, I'm going to say EL4 and not 0, because 0 is a marketing term, and it annoys the heck out of me, actually, because it is not 0. 0 is not 0. And it's funny talking about this to a few different groups that I've done these sorts of talks to, because I went and did it to a bunch of banker types, and they're like, no, 0 means 0. 0 means you're broke. But in the carbon world, 0 does not actually mean 0. So I'm going to say EL4 instead of 0, because that is a marketing term. There is no such thing as 0 when we're talking about carbon emissions. Even BC Hydro's grid is not 0. It's low, but it's not 0. So that's why EL4 is not 0. So I'm going to say EL4. I'm also going to use some terms like EL4 ready. That is a made-up term. That's not like an official term. I've made that up. But what I mean by that is that this is a home that, at least partially, in the context of what we're talking about here, may reach EL4. Usually I'll separate that out and I'll say things like, well, this heating system is EL4 ready. And what that means is if this heating system was used in a house, assuming everything else complied, that this house would meet EL4. So as far as the dates for this particular code implementation go, this was the original graphic that came out when things started getting rolling, and you'll see that 2024 we're supposed to be at medium. I'm going to update that timeline and blur it out a little bit because it's shifted a little bit. Government policy, you know, what are you going to do? This is how it works. Yeah, we're a little delayed on that right now. We are expecting that the first real proper implementation will still be measure only, and that will be sometime either end of this year or beginning of next year, with the medium being pushed to likely to either very late 2025 or possibly a little later, hopefully not much later than that. So, you know, I mean, we'll get there. Is it as fast as you know, the original timeline? No. But yeah, there's some political reasons for that, and some parts of the province, which we'll get into, maybe aren't as ready as others. And it is a provincial code, and as you know, that is kind of one of the maybe the good things or the annoying things, depending on which where you stand on things. Is that a provincial building code is kind of needs to be a one size fits all thing. You know, you have some flexibility in the ability of municipalities to adopt it and move faster, which, you know, my home municipality of Saanich and several others nearby have done. They've gone to zero carbon right away. And here in Saanich, that's fine. You know, it hasn't been a big deal for builders. You know, we're already well on the way anyways. And so that's worked quite well, but other parts of the province are not quite as ready. And you know, for a province to mandate something, then we need to be a little bit more careful than we might need to be in Saanich, for example. Now, they're generally the three different or the four different levels. Like measure only is obviously just status quo, or we're not really doing anything. We're just, you know, giving you a result, which we've actually been doing for a while. But generally, as we step down, this is how it's supposed to look. Generally, at medium, we're decarbonizing the heating system. It's not always the case, but that's sort of the goal. Generally, at low, we're going to be decarbonizing the heating and the hot water. And then when we're at zero, we're supposed to be decarbonizing all systems. What I mean by all systems is not actually all systems. So there's some details to look at there, but that's generally the intention of the code, is to have this sort of step down approach from one to the other. As far as permitting and such go, there has been a new permit form for the province that has been made. Our team made it. We're quite happy with the colors and things like that we chose. You know, secretly, your energy advisor's been collecting this data the whole time, right? It's not any new work for an energy advisor. It's been on these forms. In fact, it was on the old ones as well, but now it's just a bit more prominent. And so the energy or the zero carbon step code level is on the page 1 of the form. It says what is required and what your house is proposed to meet. So it's there. It's no extra work for your energy advisor to do this. No extra energy modeling to do it. It's all built in. Now, getting into the details of this code, this is really where things start to really come out as to where we can be effective with this code and where it might need some adjustment, or where there is potential relief for those that are worried about some parts of it. So, because it really matters what we're counting, what we're not counting. And I've mentioned that zero does not mean zero, and all systems do not mean all systems. And so let's look at what I mean by that. So what are we counting and what not? Now, principal heating system, that's going to be the heating system that's designed to take the entire load of your house. Maybe that's a group of electric baseboards. Maybe it's a heat pump. Maybe it's a gas furnace. That is going to be counted within this code and fully counted. The supplementary heating, I've got a really small check mark there, and it's sort of counted. And what I mean by that is if you've got a a heat pump and you've got a furnace attached to that heat pump, we would call that a supplementary furnace in that case. A lot of people refer to that as backup, but it's not actually backup. Backup is when the grid or something is shut down and you have a generator come on. That's a backup power. But if the grid is down, your furnace is also down. Furnace is not a backup source of heat because it will shut off if there is no electricity available, even if it's gas powered. And that's primarily because it needs a fan to run. And modern furnaces will have sparkers and things like that that make them operate in other electronics. So it's not really a backup. This is a supplementary heat when if you're in a location that would get cold enough for your heat pump to be unable to keep up with the heating needs of the house, that supplementary system would come on. And ideally, that supplementary system is set to come on gradually as your heat pump sort of fades out as it gets colder and colder. That's the ideal scenario. In my area here in Victoria, if I put a heat pump in, even kind of a crummy cheap one, it's going to be able to handle the entire load of this house all year round. It just doesn't get cold enough for that heat pump to need supplementary heat. So in Victoria, I wouldn't install any sort of supplementary heat at all. In other places, I would. But what that means is if I have a heat pump in my model, my energy model is going to say, I'm going to use that more energy efficient piece of equipment first, and then only if I need to am I going to that supplementary heating system. So when we're modeling this, in most locations in the southern province, our models are only really showing that the heat pump is being used. We're not really showing that the gas furnace is being used. So even if you have a gas furnace, it is very possible, and in fact, often likely, that it will show up as 0 on this particular calculation. So you can still have the gas furnace, and there are a lot of people around the province where that gives them a lot of comfort, right? There's kind of 2 types of comfort in the world. We can, the room comfort, that is like making this room 22 degrees all the time. That's sort of room comfort. But then there's that like comfort in my soul of like knowing that my systems are there and this is the same system that my grandfather had, my mother had, and I've had for years. And so I've got this system that I know and trust. And that is sort of a cultural shift because, in some locations, heat pumps are a little newer and people aren't quite used to them and maybe they don't trust them. And so having that ability to have that secondary system there, it is extra cost to have it there in many cases. In many cases, it's not required. But this code does not prevent that. And then, of course, as we go north, there are locations where it might be quite practical for many reasons to have that supplementary system, even if it is on fossil fuels. And we're drastically reducing the amount it's used by having that primary system be something more efficient. So the hot water use is also fully counted and fairly easy one there. So that is fully counted in the GHG calculations. Redundant and backup systems are not counted at all. And so this would be a generator, this would be a gas fireplace. And a lot of people raise eyebrows at gas fireplaces, why that is not counted. And it's simply because a gas fireplace could actually be a genuine backup. Like if you had a pilot light or a manual sparker on it, and you could light that fireplace when maybe the electrical grid's not there and keep one room warm. And there are places in this province where it does get life-threateningly cold and where that might be a practical solution. In many other places, a wood fireplace is the practical solution, and wood fireplaces are not counted. There is some work ongoing right now to maybe curtail a bit of that gas fireplace issue there, because if you're in downtown Vancouver and you have an 18-foot long gas fireplace in your townhouse and it's really a show fireplace, not actually a heating appliance, that's maybe something we do want to count. That's not a life safety backup. So there should always be provision for life safety backup. But fancy mansion mega fireplaces, we don't really need to exclude those. And so there is some work ongoing to see how we can capture that without excluding any life safety backup. Now, equipment and appliances is a different animal as well, because in the modeling, we don't take those into account. So in my energy model, I may set the fuel type for your cooking, and I may set the fuel type for your laundry, but they will show up as absolutely minuscule in terms of usage compared to like the heating system, for example. And they are not counted. That energy load is not counted in our modeling. It is, however, counted in the prescriptive pathway. So if you're following that prescriptive pathway, it is more strict, and cooking and laundry is counted in that. And those are really the only two loads that are counted that are sort of the what we might call lifestyle loads. If you wanted to have a gas heated driveway because you don't want to shovel snow, you wanted to have a pool heater, hot tub heater, patio heater, basically any other luxury load you can imagine, those are not counted within this code. So let's dig into some data here.
Hey, Mark, sorry, I just want to jump in and give you a little time cue. We're about halfway through the time for the presentation.
Perfect. Then we are on track. So our team has built a tool that allows us to go and get mega, piles of data and dig through it and find all sorts of fun stuff. And so what we've got is a database that covers the entire province now. It's about 7,000 homes of actual built homes within the last couple of years. And we can dig through that and see what happened and what they did. And so that's where this data is coming from. And we look at where we're at today. So kind of where we're sitting today in BC, this is what we look at for hot water use. We are about 2/3 on gas and about 1/3 on little more than 1/3 on electric. This is very regional. So, Vancouver Island, similar other places, if you're in Invermere, it's going to be 100% electric because we don't have access to gas. So it is very regional. I'm not going to talk too much about hot water, but generally the green side is what we would call EL4 ready. That's going to make it to the top step. The red side, not so much. The interesting thing about hot water is it tends not to be as controversial as some of the other things. People tend not to care where their hot water comes from as long as they can turn on the tap and get hot water. And also one of the main reasons when I talk to builders, why are they installing gas hot water? They'll say, well, because of rebate. Those rebates are now gone. I do expect to see a bit of a shift there, primarily because it is often significantly cheaper to install an electric system rather than a gas system. There's some good evidence to say that it's cheaper to run the electric system as well, particularly when you take maintenance into account. So I do expect this trend to shift a little bit. On the heating side, we do have quite a mix, and I've sort of broken out a bunch of different heating systems here. So we have, in the dark green, that's a heat pump primarily system, or like an electric only heat pump sort of thing. The light green would be electric resistance of some kind, so maybe electric baseboards or something similar. The bright red, gas only. The dark red, gas only with AC. And the blue there is a dual energy system. So that's a heat pump with a gas hook to it. So when we break this down, we do see that 1/3 of the homes in BC roughly are what I'd call EL4 ready. So 1/3 of homes across the province already doing what they need to do to get us there to that top step. And that would include that blue area, right, which is the dual energy, because they have that heat pump in the mix. They're good to go. About 1/3 of homes are using gas only, and as a result, they are probably having higher energy bills than they would had they installed at least a dual energy system at some point. The one that I'd really like to see change quickly is the little less than 1/3 of homes that have spent at least most of the money to get to EL4, but are not using their systems to their full potential. So if you're installing gas with AC, you have already a trade that knows how to install a heat pump. You have the wiring for the heat pump. You have the power capacity for the heat pump. You have the indoor units often that are very similar or identical to heat pumps. And you have an outdoor unit that is very similar or identical to a heat pump. And so why not just get a heat pump? And so I think this is really low-hanging fruit, that 27 roughly % there. And in many cases, this group will have the highest energy bills of all the groups because you're kind of getting the worst of both worlds there. You're not using the full potential of the system that you've paid for. So this is, I think, really low-hanging fruit and a place we can do a lot better on very quickly. And as I've mentioned before, this is a very regional thing. So if we look at Vancouver Island, we are about 1/4 not EL4 ready. If we look at Kelowna, they are about 1/4 EL4 ready. So it's opposite. And but you'll notice that in Kelowna, 71% are using gas with AC, which means, like I said, they've already paid the money to have the equipment to be EL4 ready. Let's just make that jump and do that. And this is very, very low hanging fruit to be able to make that jump. Interestingly, as we go up the energy step code, this table shifts quite dramatically. And on Vancouver Island, when we go up to that step 4 level from step 3 on the energy step code, the EL4 not ready only drops down to about 10% of homes. So it's a very low percentage of homes that are not already ready on Vancouver Island. And some low-hanging fruit in other. Where I see this policy sort of being easy and or not easy is really regional. And as I've shown in that table there, right, in areas where you have less cooling, right, where cooling is not common. I'm thinking, like maybe like Vanderhoof and stuff like that, where you're probably not installing any sort of cooling equipment, so there's probably not a trade in town. There may not be that much experience with that. That's where this policy may run into some issues and some hurdles. In areas like the Okanagan, central interior, anywhere where you're installing cooling already, even if you're a mostly gas region, you already have the trade, you already have the power capacity, you already have all these things. The supply chain is there to make that switch very quickly, very cost effectively. In those more northern areas, that's probably where we're going to see the speed bumps, though. And I want to look at an example house. So this is a house that is actually in climate zone 6. It's actually in Quesnel. Nice little house. I really like it because it's kind of like your average Joe type house, literally built by a guy named Joe. And so I wanted to show where this house falls. If we look at, again, the data across the database here, we see that most houses are showing up in that zero carbon ready. Actually, I think this might be a database for Vancouver Island only because of that big spike in the green. So this might be what Vancouver Island looks like. I don't think this is the full province. But if we plot where the code falls on this, we see that the levels roughly line up with everything on gas, one thing on gas, and then nothing on gas. Why the gap between 0 and strong is so small, you'll have to ask the code makers on that. It is actually a pretty hard target to hit that little zone there. Very few buildings actually hit that little zone, so there's maybe an argument that we maybe don't need that zone. But if we take this house and we just build it code as code and use all gas, no surprise, it hits way out in the area out there, and it's not going to qualify for much. If we build it step 5 of the energy step code, we take a big jump down. Makes sense, we're using less energy. If we go an electric hot water tank, we take another jump down, but that's starting to look scary because now we haven't even moved into the moderate zone on this particular metric. But luckily we have those other metrics, and actually these two scenarios do actually qualify moderate on the other metrics. If we keep going and we say move that house to Victoria and make it step 5, we can qualify moderate because Victoria is warmer, we're not using as much heat. If we take that house and we do a hybrid heating system, we take another jump down. If we take that house with a hybrid heating system, or a dual energy system as I've been calling it, I guess, and an electric hot water, we go all the way into the top. So we've still got a gas furnace in this house, but the majority of that heating is going to be done by that heat pump, and the gas is only coming on when it's very, very cold. And electric hot water, which would be cheaper to install. So we can get there relatively easily. If we take that house and we put it the same thing in Dawson Creek, it does move up a little bit. It's colder, but we're still well within that 0 target. So it's quite possible. Wanted to divert now to talk about heat pumps in cold climates. I've just sort of introduced the idea of using a heat pump in Dawson. Pretty cold there, not necessarily seen as the ideal location for a heat pump. But it is certainly possible. Whether it's practical today, I mean, we'd have to talk to people on the ground there to see that, because there may be trade, lack of trades and all sorts of things. This is a market that's really just emerging in these areas. It's not something that you can, walk down to your local hardware store and pick up the way I can here in Victoria. But they do work. And this picture that I'm showing here is actually in northern New Brunswick when I was out there doing some things. And I thought it was really funny. It's this old church, uninsulated, and they've got these 3 heat pumps lined up outside. They actually converted from an oil furnace. The reason I know that is because I was taking pictures of the church and the priest came out and he was all like, "Oh, are you interested in the architecture of the church?" And I was like, "Well, actually, sorry, I'm only interested in your heat pumps." And he thought that was weird, but Catholic priest being forgiving talked to me about it anyways. So apparently they basically couldn't do mass in cold temperatures because uninsulated church, the oil furnace wasn't keeping up. They switched to these heat pumps a number of years ago. They're not new. And now they can have mass at minus 30 and the whole church is warm. So they do work. And what they've done is they've propped them up off the ground because then they're up out of the snow, and they've also covered them because they get icicles dripping off the roof to protect them from that and the deep snow, and they are working very well. So they absolutely work. Anybody who's out there telling you that they don't work maybe needs to update their training. They absolutely do work. But there are some other considerations that we want to take into account. And if we look at something like this in places around the province, take a pretty cheap heat pump and put it in that house I was using as an example and move it around a little bit. Pretty cheap heat pump, if it's in Kamloops, it's going to have a COP of 2.5. What I mean by COP is coefficient of production. That's 1 kilowatt of electricity goes in, 2.5 kilowatts of heat come out. And so we'd call that 250% efficient. If I make a half decent heat pump in that same house, it's going to be 2.8. So better heat pump, better results. If I move that around to different places like Smithers, I get 2.3 on the cheap heat pump. And then if I move to Dawson, I get a 1.7. So 1 kilowatt in equals 1.7 kilowatts out of heat. And now why that matters is because, we're all thinking about cost, right? Inflation and whatever but we need to know what our running cost is going to be. And often the criticism is that, well, it's going to be way too expensive to heat with electricity if I'm cold, or my heating bills are going to go way up if I switch to electricity, because electricity sells for more money, which it does in most cases. So the way to figure this out, though, is cost of energy divided by average efficiency of the equipment equals our cost to run it. Fairly easy to figure out. So in the north, they have, you have Pacific Northern Gas, and Pacific Northern Gas charges different rates in different towns, a little different than Fortis, which I think more of us would be used to. So in Fort St. John, they charge about 12 cents. At least last time they published their website, they did. And so in Fort St. John, I would say 12 cents divided by 95% of the efficiency of the gas system equals the running cost of about 12 cents. In Vanderhoof, they charge 19 cents, which is wild that it's actually more than electricity in Vanderhoof. So I have a running cost of about 20 cents if I'm burning gas. In Kamloops, where Fortis is essentially giving away gas for free, and what they're really doing is renting you the meter. That's how Fortis makes their money, is it's the connection, and then after that, they don't really worry too much about how much gas you use. So this will change a little bit, and that's why you see that caveat at the bottom there, is if you have a high gas load house, your per kilowatt gas cost is probably a little less. If you're not using very much gas, it might be a little bit more. So take this with a little grain of salt. We can debate whether it's 6 cents, 5 cents, or 7 cents. Either way, it doesn't matter. The math formula is still the same. But that's going to come out to about 6 cents a kilowatt for running cost on that. If we take a really worst case scenario, BC Hydro, Kamloops again, the average cost of electricity is somewhere like around 12 cents, but let's say it's 13 just for the sake of argument. And we take that 2.5 heat pump, that's that cheap heat pump, I'm going to have a running cost of 5 cents. So it is the cheapest option for running cost, and it's simply because the equipment is much more efficient, and that overcomes the higher cost of the fuel. Now let's look at the other piece there, because the other thing is that you're often told that you're going to have a huge supplementary system, often called backup, to run these systems or to make these systems work, because they're going to shut off when it gets cold, right? Well, if we're using half-decent systems, that's not quite true. It's not quite that simple, and lots of things to consider there. So I'm using the example, the Samsung Hilux system here. It's a decent heat pump and stuff, and you'll notice it's actually labeled as a central air conditioning unit. this has led to a huge amount of confusion in industry and others, where some of these systems are being installed and set to be air conditioning only, and even though they are fully functional heat pumps, and which is, of course, is a huge waste. But so this is the example I'm using, and I'm using that same house that I showed earlier as the house. So if I take that house and put it in Victoria, this machine is actually too big, but you get the idea. Like, Victoria minus 15 is like deathly cold. It's about, and we're not going to get much colder than that. And so this heat pump would cover 100% of the load. It's actually a bit too big. We want to use a smaller one, and stuff. And what we're looking at here is this top line is the upper end, the maximum this can do, and the lower line is the minimum this unit can do. And what we want to be doing is sizing our heat pump so that we're always in that operational range of this house. So in Victoria, this machine is too big. We've got too much operational range above the line there. But let's say that we move it to Penticton. So Penticton, you know, cold day in Penticton's minus 25. Every now and then might dip a little bit below that, but you know, pretty devastatingly cold in Penticton's minus 25. This same house has you know, a little over 40,000. We're in BTUs here, which annoys me. It should be in kilowatts, but all the mechanical stuff's done in BTUs. So we have a little over 40,000 BTU heating load. So for most of the year, this heat pump's working great. It's doing all we need, but we've got this little triangle here. That's where supplementary heat comes in, right? Is where the heat pump's ability to keep up has sort of dropped below what our maximum need might be. And we're talking maximum load here. When we design a system, we are doing the worst case scenario, absolute coldest day of the year. That's what we're designing for. So, you know, I don't know how long it stays at minus 25 in Penticton for. Probably not very long. Maybe a week sort of thing. I think it was the cold snap this year was about a week. And so it's not huge, and it is a small bit of supplementary. In this particular house's case, that's about 2 kilowatts, which you could probably do with your heated bathroom tile. Like it's not a huge amount of heat. It's not this big separate furnace that we need to put on there, and we don't need to have 100% backup, right? We don't need to have, if we have a 10 kilowatt furnace, we don't need to have a 10 kilowatt supplementary to do that. It means that our electrical load is quite a bit smaller, our panel size is quite a bit smaller, and quite a bit cheaper. If we take that same house and we move it to Quesnel, climate zone 6 now we do have a full need for supplementary systems. And then again, this is where it gets more complicated and how, you know, we're not a one-size-fits-all province, right? For the most part, most days of the year, we're in a good range. Heat pump's going to be doing a whole lot of work. But do I have time? Yes, I do. For about 1 week a year, we're going to get into that minus 35 range. And at that minus 35 range, this heat pump may still function. In fact, I do know this heat pump is capable of going down past minus 25, even though it's not rated.
Oh, Mark, we've lost your audio again.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Yeah, we're back. Okay, cool. All right, well, that's good. Didn't have to do the old turn it on and turn it off again. So in this situation, we probably are going to need some full supplementary system. So this is where we'd see if we have a 10 kilowatt heat pump, we're probably going to need also a 10 kilowatt, maybe electric resistance or something to keep up. And this is really where the rubber starts to hit the road of where we see complications and maybe extra cost, because that now electrical service load is probably going to need to be a bit bigger. So it's not totally smooth sailing in these colder places. It's manageable. We can do it. In most cases, it's going to be a cost implication more than like a absolute physical barrier can't do it. And we're really talking about, in terms of cost, we're talking about 1 week a year where we're using primarily electric resistance. You know, maybe for 3 to 4 weeks a year, our heat pump is doing at least most of the load, and we're using a little bit of electric resistance on that. And then the rest of the year, we're using full heat pump, which means over the course of the year, this is probably still a more cost-effective system than maybe having a fossil fuel burning system. All right, we're looking at 8:48, so we're right on time. Perfect. So Looking at some case studies now. So we've got some case studies scattered around the province here. Got kind of an average single family home. I'm pretty sure this one is actually in Penticton. If you look at the stats there, very normally built house. It is in real life, I believe this one actually got to step 4 of the energy step code, but we've sort of dumbed it down to be step 3. So it's like a proper minimum code type house. And what we've done, and now these slides are going to be shared so you can review it later, I won't go through it in great detail, is make kind of a matrix. So if you want to say, well, I want to do energy step code 3, and I want to do emissions level 4, we can kind of like your kids' times table, right? That's, you sort of line it up and see what you would have to do. And we've looked at what changes would be required to do that. So if we look at, say, I wanted to get to energy step code 4 and I wanted to be emissions level 4, well, I just need to reduce my air leakage to 1.5 and use a dual energy or all electric heating system. This house already had an electric tank in it, so that's a pretty small change. That is, you know, I would already have an AC unit in this place, so all I'm doing is taking that AC and making it a heat pump. Pretty small change. The air tightness is quality controlled by the site team, by the build team. These are pretty small changes. And you'll notice on the list too, sometimes we say low-end heat pump, right? This isn't some fancy Mitsubishi high-end thing. This is a low-end, probably contractor grade heat pump. These are not necessarily, you know, big fancy things. And in many of them, you'll see notes saying full gas system is still okay. So it's in many cases, it's actually not that restrictive. In this particular case, at step 4 EL2, all we've done is we've reduced the air leakage a little bit beyond what is required, and that allows us to still have a full gas system. So still lots of options to be able to do it. Where our options get a little thin is when we get into the sort of the higher end stuff. So this is it's a big house, pretty fancy house. You can see the pool in the front there. This is a house that started with gas furnace AC as well as a gas combi boiler. That's a boiler that's doing hot water and in-floor radiant heating. And so much more complex type of house, much higher energy load as well, much less efficient house. This one is somewhere in the Okanagan. I can't remember exactly where it is. But here, even with that much higher complication, to get to the emissions level 4 and step 3, all we need to do is switch to an electric hot water tank, not a big deal, and add a heat pump to the heating system. Again, not that big of a deal. We've already got air conditioning there, so we're switching that air conditioning to be a heat pump. The gas boiler can remain for the in-floor radiant heating. That would be considered a redundant or backup system. So you can still have that gas radiant floor within this house and potentially be using that. So like I said before, EL4, which is called 0, is not 0. We can still have gas use within the house. Now, to get to step 5 with this house, we do need more upgrades, and that's simply a function of the energy step code and this being a complex house. That's why it needs more upgrades to do that. And so you'll see some more changes listed there. But still, essentially the same idea. It's a heat pump and electric hot water tank gets us to emission level 4 and relatively easy in that way. If we go to a laneway type house, I believe this one is on the North Island in real life. Very, very inexpensive type of building. In this case, there's not a lot of room in there for furnaces and things, so it makes sense that it would have electric systems, and then therefore, even at step 3, it's already at the top carbon level as well. So fairly easy to get there with a building of this type. And even at step 4, all we're talking about is a low-end heat pump. That's probably a ductless mini split, mounted on the wall or something like that. And now with our cooling requirements that BC has introduced as of March 8th, that's likely required anyways. So for the emissions codes, we're probably going to hit that just by default with a place like this. And now this one also did need some upgrades to get to step 5. But if we look at what they are, that's step 5 of the energy code. We look at what they are. It's R40 in the ceiling, R22 in the walls. And these are very generic buildings. These are very small upgrades. So the upgrade package for step 5 in this particular house gets us all the way to the top emissions level and all the way to the top step code level. So this is a very, it's a little box. It's a very easy house to get all the way to the top on everything without really spending
a whole lot of dollars on this. So the key messages I want to leave you with are these. Many homes across the province are doing this already. So it is not impossible in any location. There are houses in every location doing this already. Some regions are more ready than others. So some of those regions, particularly the cold regions, the trade supplies, the supply chain, that's not quite there. We do have in some regions as well, power limitations where we might not be able to get as much power as we need to our new homes. So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. If you're advocating or working in your particular region, it's important, I think, to look at those sorts of capacity things and deal with those problems maybe before we start really jumping up the levels the way maybe Saanich has. And Saanich has been reasonably successful at it. We're pretty ready for things like that here, so it's not as big of a deal where I am. And the third thing is that simple, small changes allow homes to reach the top levels. It's not big, huge ground shifts of like, holy cow, we're totally changing the way we're building. We're totally changing these houses. A lot of times we're just switching an outdoor unit that looks identical with another one that looks identical. In fact, many cases they are identical. We're just changing the programming on it. And so these are simple, small changes. This is not a massive change by any means. And doing those simple, small changes can have a huge effect on the emissions. It can have a large effect on the energy bills of the occupants. And quite often what we're seeing is actually a reduction in cost, not an increase. Which is always kind of funny because like most of the code changes we see, it's like a huge cost change. Like the seismic code changes that we're expecting coming in next year, huge potential cost change and up by a significant margin. So it's very rare that we see a code change where we can actually reduce costs, not only running costs, but also install costs. And that's not going to be true everywhere, right? I mean, there's, if you're in a small town where there is only one heat pump installer, that heat pump installer might charge you an arm and a leg because they're the only one. What are you going to do? Go to somebody else? So that's not going to be true everywhere, but certainly where the majority of people live in BC, that is going to be true. And looks like we're right at just about at 9 o'clock here, so we're right on time for some Q&A. I haven't been watching the chat, but I see there's 26 messages in there, so looks like we've been active.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. And yeah, I've been moderating, or well, I've been keeping track of all the questions that come through. So folks, when you posted a question, you should have seen my thumbs up reaction. That means I see it. And we're going to address it with Mark in this Q&A portion. If I didn't give you a thumbs up, maybe just give me a little nudge. I might have missed your question there. All right. Okay, so our first question here, Lori asks, why do some communities think that moving to EL4 after 6 months of EL1 is too difficult or too fast? Why can't a municipality make bylaws for EL4 faster?
Well, some have, so certainly the South Vancouver Island and parts of the North Island as well have done that. Some parts of the Lower Mainland have done that as well. Some parts of the Kootenays are looking at that as well, I believe. So I think this is really a regional thing, right? If we look at what builders are doing today, if we try and shift groups of builders very quickly, and like on Vancouver Island, it wasn't really a shift. It's a small group of builders, and that small group of builders likely already knows what the alternatives are and has easy access to those alternatives. But if I'm in small northern town somewhere, I may not have access to those resources. I may never have installed a heat pump. So moving quickly could be problematic. I would suggest that is probably not the case anywhere in the Okanagan or Lower Mainland, that those areas probably could shift more quickly than others. Whether they should go to the top step or, I wouldn't want to speculate on that. I'd need more data on that, but there are certainly areas that would be ready to move quicker than others. And I would base it on where we are today, right? How much change does it need? If it needs a lot of change, let's move a little bit slower. I'd rather get there 2 years later and intact than get there tomorrow and shatter a bunch of things and make a bunch of mistakes and, you know, do something wrong.
Great, thanks, Mark. And we do, as we go through these questions, we have some more coming through. So we will move through them pretty quickly. But Lori, if you have a follow-up question or comment, just feel free to pop it in the chat and we can come back to it. Greg just posted a comment in East Kootenay. The new heat pumps can run to -18 degrees Celsius. Most heat pumps here are still using natural gas as the supplementary system in the combo systems. We only had 11 days this winter when the natural gas had to be used. Just a data point. So
yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what we're hearing. So that 11 days, like if you perhaps switch that to an electric system, that's not a big energy bill, right? Yes, your electric bill is running pretty fast for that time, but the majority of your time is not. And when we look at a new house, if I'm looking at installing a gas supplementary system, I've got to count the piping and all this other stuff. That's a fairly expensive install compared to just a little bit of electric resistance. And so I think that's really where the math gets compelling, is if I'm only using that gas system for a week a year, this thing takes maintenance, there's all sorts of space requirements for it and stuff like that. You know, I'm paying a bill monthly, regardless of whether I'm using it or not. Should I be installing that? You know, maybe not.
Great, thanks. Lori had a question and Tracy echoed her question. She just asked, why does Clean BC require that the gas furnace be decommissioned when income qualified homeowners are installing a heat pump? So this is for the income qualified program. They would not have supplementary heating and feel anxious if the temperature drops. And then Tracy just comments, Clean BC's income qualified requires to remove / decommission gas fireplaces leaves people anxious. Why not leave them for a year until folks are comfortable with their heat pumps, which if properly sized will keep homes comfortable?
Yeah, that's a good question. We back to that sort of soul comfort, right? That comfort in your soul more than comfort in your room sometimes. And it's a good question. This goes over more into retrofit side of things, and zero carbon step code, to be clear, does not cover retrofit. There are other rules coming that do. They're likely in place around 2030, and it will severely restrict our ability to use gas in homes. It's the highest efficiency equipment standards is that's what's coming. That will very basically cut off any sort of new install of a gas system in a home. The repair will still be allowed for a little while. So it's you know, not quite that simple, but yeah, you know, rebate programs in general, and this is something I do spend a fair bit of time talking about in my role as CHBA vice president, is advocating for various different types of rebate programs. And I've always had the beef with rebate programs that you have to pay up front, and there's a lot of restrictions, and quite often we're incentivizing the equipment, not the outcome. And so they tend to go to people who are relatively wealthy, who can afford to pay for equipment up front and then wait 6 months to get paid, right? And if you can wait 6 months and install your system, you probably didn't need the money in the first place. And so the income qualified is a little different, but still it does, you know, if you're, you know, working at the mill in Houston or something and your furnace breaks, you know, you maybe have an income and have a good job, but you maybe don't have the cash sitting around to pay 20 grand to do a new heating system. This is an emergency repair. And those are the sorts of situations that we really should be capturing, I think, with rebate and incentive programs. And rather than incentivizing the equipment, which is a perpetual problem, because is my heat pump on the list or not? You know, is always the conversation. We've had so many clients install heat pumps that are perfectly good machines, but they're not on the list, so they don't get the rebate. And that always just gets my goat to no end, that we should incentivize the outcome. Did they reduce their GHG emissions by the prescribed amount? Yes or no? That should be the rebate. But anyways, I'm going to get a longer.
I know we can have a full 30-minute discussion on the intricacies of the rebate programs. Yeah, great. Okay, and Jay just asked a clarifying question. So when we say gas fireplace is not counted, does this mean a home can be EL4 and still have an operating gas fireplace?
In fact, you can have 20 operating gas fireplaces should you want to. There was some really outrageous examples of some Whistler homes that had, I think, like 2 outdoor fireplaces. So they're just heating the outside, like, you know, and also several really, you know, those really long decorative ones. They're not even counted as heating appliances. They have like jet engines on them to exhaust the heat, because otherwise the house would get way too hot. So you're just, again, just heating the outside. that is all allowed under the current version of this code. But like I said, some work is ongoing in that area. And so I expect to see an update that would curtail that and either limit the size of a fireplace that you're allowed to count as a backup heat source, to a point where like a regular house in the north where you're getting life-threateningly cold could have a fireplace still, but all those decorative, ridiculous fireplaces, those are out. And I do want to clarify too on the fireplaces. If you're in my area, a lot of the fireplaces do not have pilot lights. They do not have the ability to run without electricity. They have circuitry and stuff in them that does not allow that. So often you'll see some fireplaces with a little battery backup inside them, and that would allow them to run. But in this area, we often don't see that. So your fireplace would not actually be a backup heat source if it does not have that ability to run on its own without the grid. So which is fairly common in my area, not so common in others, but something to watch for.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and Tracy just echoed in a comment there, kind of the ridiculousness of those fancy fireplaces.
Yeah, it's a well-known problem. You got to start somewhere, but it's a well-known problem. Yeah.
Great. And Greg just says, we came across a home in Fernie where they insisted that they heat with a wood stove and their electric baseboards for the supplementary heat when they were away from home. So they were not interested in a heat pump at all.
So actually that would be EL4 compliant already. So they'd be good to go on that. They could do that. That would be perfectly code compliant at the top level. And wood is an interesting discussion. So we encounter that somewhat frequently in the rural areas where people are heating primarily with wood. You can get a wood furnace that would be a code compliant source of heat. But a wood fireplace is not a code compliant source of heat. The reason being is that you would have to take action to make it hot. And so if you're not home or, maybe it's night or something like that, you're not going to go out there and light the fireplace and make it get hot. It's not an automatic control. So to be code compliant, you do need some level of automated control that it would come on when somebody's not there. So the electric baseboard would qualify for that. And so if you're, building your cabin out somewhere and you're saying, I'm going to heat with wood, that's fine. But we're going to model as though your electric baseboards are doing the majority of the work. And in that case, that would pass EL4. You don't need to have a heat pump. Electric resistance is plenty fine. It's 17 times less carbon intensive than gas. And it easily makes the target. So doing that sort of setup is fine. In the city, burning your wood fireplace all the time is not particularly neighborly. But it's certainly a reasonable option in the rural areas and things like that.
Wonderful, thanks. And Jay just asks, what is the date or the year for BC Home's primary heating systems data?
Yeah, so that is, I believe we filtered there to the last 2 years. So these are all homes built within the last 2 years. It's would be about 7,000 homes in that data set. Great,
thanks. Okay, Tracy just comments on the low-hanging fruit in Kelowna area to target gas heating with AC cooling. Why not target this area for a quicker move to EL4? And then there was just some agreement from another Tracy that maybe there's some no political will and pushback.
Yeah, in fact, this is something specifically in Kelowna that our team is working on, and I will be in Kelowna on, I believe, the 24th of this month. I think it's a Tuesday. In a week and a half there is a CHBA event, which I think anybody can go to if anybody wants to. I don't think it's restricted to members. I'm not sure what the capacity of the room is, but so we will be presenting the Kelowna specific data on that and talking exactly about that is how ready is Kelowna? And you're absolutely right that this is some very serious low-hanging fruit where we've already got an AC system. Why can't that be a heat pump? And in my opinion, there's no reason that it can't be. You've got the power capacity, you've got the trades. This is a very, very minor thing to make a huge step forward and a huge reduction in carbon emissions.
Great, thanks. And Mark, maybe we'll get some more information about that session to send out to folks when we follow up, if it is open to the public and folks want to attend. Great. Okay, so Jake, this is a bit of a longer one. So Jake says, A new high-efficient home with little to no gas appliances now has a heat pump, electric dryer, water heater, electric range, an EV charger, and now with BC bylaws changing to allow laneway carriage houses for rentals, another heat pump, water heater, cooktop, possible EV charger, and dryer. Not only does it max out the electrical code for 200 amp service, now new homes with above mentioned will need more than 200 amp. At peak usage between 4 to 8 p.m., charging car, cooking, showering, heating, cooling, etc. Where is that data showing that the existing grid can handle these spike loads, especially in smaller communities? And then just a follow-up question, if a city like Kelowna switches by 2030, the pie chart showed it's relying on majority gas heat. How will that city upgrade the grid by 2030?
Yeah, so really good question, actually really timely, because I spent yesterday talking to a big group of builders in Nanaimo about this, and part of that talk was actually with BC Hydro. They're talking exactly about this. And admittedly, and I think they'll admit themselves, that BC Hydro is a little bit behind the 8 ball on talking about this and telling people what their plan is. There's a bit of a lack of information out there about this, and mostly they're just kind of bad at marketing on this. And so, but the good news is they do have a plan for this. There is an integrated resource plan. It's unlikely that we're ever going to get a place like Kelowna to flick a switch and be ready or be 100% electric by 2030. Kelowna's on the Fortis grid anyway, so it'd be Fortis, not BC Hydro there. But the same idea applies. It's the same sort of situation there. It's probably not going to be 100% electric by 2030. I think that's a little bit optimistic, but certainly could be a long ways down the road there already, because they already do have that cooling and such. The power load equipment is already there. What's really interesting, and part of the talk we talked about yesterday, and we could do a whole talk on just this, is that we are typically underloading our electrical panels. You know, most homes, we did a bit of a study actually in Rossland a while back. One of our team members is actually an electrician and looked into this. If we're careful about our load management, the average kind of regular person house needs about 138 amps, you know, as sort of a base, and that includes a car charger. So we consider that an essential load, and that still leaves you room for the hot tub and the luxury loads on a 200 amp power service. Where things get a little more complicated is when we start adding garden suites and stuff like that. And that's typically where we see 200 amp services. We're typically not seeing people go to a 400, which is quite a bit more expensive. In the BC Hydro zone, those do cost about $10,000 to do, so we want to avoid that. Work is ongoing on this, and there's a lot of builder education coming for this, and BC Hydro is just starting to sort of show people what you can do and how you can stay within that 200 amp limit. It's not particularly hard. It's actually quite cost effective to do. In many of our cases, so our team, we've been slowly outfitting our whole team with electric vehicles as company vehicles, and what we've been doing there is essentially the company buys the charger for your house and integrates it into your house there. And in at least one case there where we already had a pretty loaded up panel, we're using load shifting devices. And so when the laundry is going, the car charger is not charging. And we've used that in a number of our developments and things, because you know, how often do you charge, or do you drive 600 kilometers, you need to immediately go charge and drive another 600 kilometers and do your laundry at the same time? It's not very often. And if you did, that's what the city chargers, superchargers are for. So there are solutions to this. It's not as dire as it looks, and there's some code updates on the horizon as well to do things like remove a lot of the load that is currently required for lighting, because the lighting code hasn't been updated since like 1907 or something ridiculous, and it assumes a 100-watt light bulb and versus a 2-watt LED bulb. And so we can take all those lighting required circuits, condense them to one underloaded circuit. Now all of a sudden we've got an extra 60 amps in the panel. So those code changes are coming. I'm not exactly sure when they'll be in place, but help is on the way for that. I don't think it's that dire of a situation. And if your electrician is saying your regular sort of house needs to bump up to a 400 amp service, either your regular sort of house is actually a mansion, in which case you've probably got the money for it, not too worried about it, or there's some mistake in that. A regular sort of house should easily be able to do 200 amp service with a suite with a car charger.
Great. Yeah. And I think that this discussion too highlights the real importance of focusing on that building envelope as well and keeping our heating and cooling loads down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're building a highly efficient house, your heater is smaller and therefore smaller on your panel. So
yeah, great. Okay, thanks, Mark. So Marty says, I used to live in Fort St. John. Prices may have changed, but when I put in a ground source heat pump, the cost of gas was 0.035, okay, 35 cents per kilowatt hour, or sorry, my quick math. 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And electricity was around 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Plus BC Hydro has a conservation rate, so I paid more with a ground source heat pump because my electric heat pushed me into the more expensive tier for part of my usage. Long story short, my bill reduced by about 25% going to a ground source heat pump from natural gas furnace, even with a COP of 3 to 4, because of the large cost difference between the fuel choices. Something to keep in mind, or you will get really disappointed heat pump owners that switch from gas.
yeah, and this is where it's a really regional discussion, right? And in the far north there, you know, ground source heat pump then sort of removes that cold issue with the air source heat pump. Yeah, I'm going off the rates that are listed on you know, Pacific Northern's website there, and so they are quite substantial. And it's interesting that those rates we're seeing today are where they make the gas. I would have thought it would be it'd be cheaper if you know, the gas pump and well is kind of right down the street, but that's not what we're seeing. So I mean, but it is different regional, and that's why, you know, that's why I show the formula for the math, not the necessarily want to stick to exactly what the math actually is. You've got to do the formula for yourself in your own location. It will be different everywhere.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. And I do appreciate that these nuances are a little bit difficult when we have a call kind of spanning across the entire province.
Yeah.
So Greg just asks, we are finding the heat pump / gas supplement systems are installed for $20,000 to $25,000. An upgrade to a 200 amp panel from a 100 amp panel can cost up to $5,000. Are you finding these types of costs in the Lower Mainland?
Yeah, so that's a retrofit situation, and again, retrofit is a whole different ballgame, huge different ballgame. There's a link that I would like to include with the follow-up here. That again, BC Hydro, actually federal government, NRCan just made a number of videos, and we'll maybe include that link with the follow-up, Jana, to that video. But it talks about keeping in a number of different situations. They have a few different videos there. It talks about how homeowners are retrofitting and trying to keep their 100 amp service and how we can manage the loads there, because you can actually look at historical loads and use, it's called Rule 8 in the electrical code. And then using that historical load, you only have to count the new loads. You don't actually have to count the loads that are already there if your historical load is lower. And historically, we're seeing like a 30% some odd usage on panels rather than the full 100. And so you've still got lots of space in your panel. Quite often can add heat pumps and everything to a 100 amp panel and still be fine using that Rule 8. I'm not sure that Rule 8 is very well known amongst electricians. It doesn't seem to be, but that's what they're working on now. And that, you know, like I said, retrofit's a whole different ballgame. The cost, I wouldn't even want to speculate. It'd be different everywhere. It'd be different for every builder. It's certainly not free, whatever it is.
Great, thanks. Okay, we'll make sure to include that link there. Tracy just asked, what do we do if Fortis says they don't have enough electrical capacity and that gas must be in new homes?
Write a strongly worded letter. You know, that's probably going to be the case in some small pockets where the grid, for whatever reason, has not been updated. And usually it's not that they can't supply it. It's usually that they want you to buy the transformer to do it and upgrade the transformer. It's a line upgrade or something like that. But what is happening, and the BC Utilities Commission is now finally sort of allowing this, is that future planning on the grid and future expansion can be done without the imminent need. So BC Hydro and others can actually go and expand the grid instead of waiting for it to be required. They can do that future planning, and that is now happening. Of course, it takes a number of years to build out the grid. So you're going to find pockets, and it is pockets, though it's not everywhere. And I think that's what's important to know, is that, yeah, you may run into that in these small places, and it's actually mostly the places that are growing quickly. So like Surrey, which has grown very quickly, that's where they're upgrading all the substations. That's where a lot of the money is going. But, you know, downtown Victoria, you'd have no problem getting a 1,000 amp service if you needed it. The grid is there, and we're not growing that quickly, and stuff. So it really depends on where you are. But it is pockets. There are certainly pockets where it could be problematic. But again, using those different rules on the building code or the electrical code to keep that 200 amp service, certainly a great option.
Great, thanks. And Greg just has a heat pump question here. Coil icing at temperatures around 0 degrees Celsius is a concern. There are defrost cycles, but it's still a bit concerning to heat pump owners in the East Kootenays. Any recent advances with that issue?
Yeah, well, I mean, proper cold climate heat pumps will still have some frost every now and then, and that's normal. It happens. And one of the things we got to remember is that we have to design the equipment to accommodate the weather that it's in. And so if we're in a cold location with deep snow, we'll typically take that heat pump and bolt it onto the wall high up, so that it's not stuck in the deep snow. As it drips, they all drip a little bit. They have a condensate drain on them, so they drip water, and you'll get some icicles coming down. So you want to put it in a place where having icicles is not a problem. But don't put it at your front door where it's going to ice up your front pathway. So that's typically how we deal with that. It's not a problem. It doesn't seem to damage the machines at all. It's just part of design. This is good design. Ideally, if you're building a new house, you're using an integrated design process, meaning that all the trades and the designers are all in one room talking to each other rather than being in separate places, not talking to each other and not working together. Building is a team sport. And if we're not on the same team, we are not building cost effectively, and we're not making good outcomes.
Great, thanks. And yeah, Casper just commented there too that it could be an issue, or it could be, yeah, an issue of oversizing that heat pump as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And that, again, back to that design, right? Good design, we need to size properly. And heat pumps and other high-performance heating systems are much more sensitive to size. The old-fashioned gas furnace, you could kind of just whack in a big one and it would sort of work. But now we have to be a little bit more fine-tuned on that sizing. Energy advisors across the province have been taking all the training to do that sizing. So, there are trades like heat pump trades and stuff that haven't done that, and maybe don't want to sit at a computer and do the math. Energy advisors sit at computers and do math all the time. So it's a really good business model there to have your energy advisor do the math on what this heat pump should do in terms of size, and that then can help your mechanical contractor out in picking the right one.
And a little plug for further CEA workshops. I will be sending out information about upcoming workshops, but we will be having a webinar that is focused on verifying F28012 heat load calculation. So how to know that the heat pump that was installed or is being suggested for install is properly sized. So you'll find that in the follow-up email as well. All right, and Greg just asks, what is the average price per gigajoule for resistance heating versus price per gigajoule for natural gas?
Gigajoule, I don't know. So gigajoules times 277 for a kilowatt, 277.7 if we want to be exact, I think. So right now, take your BC Hydro bill, divide it by the number of kilowatts, and times it by 277.7. BC Hydro does have some fees on there and stuff that are daily rates and stuff, so it's going to be slightly different for everybody. But generally, the average we see is around 12 cents per kilowatt for electricity. And for gas, again, there's meter rates and stuff, so low gas use are going to have higher per kilowatt use. If you're high gas, it's going to be lower, so there's a little bit of plus or minus. But again, generally, we see it's around, that 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt, so times that by 277.7. To get a gigajoule.
Perfect, thank you. And I do see we still have quite a few questions left in the chat. We have 5 or so minutes left, so we'll try to get through them here. Mark just asked, is this all in Canada? Where does the USA stand on this code? Yes, Mark, this is a BC, British Columbia specific conversation about the building code in British Columbia.
The Americans are doing a bunch of stuff. Various different states are leading, various different states aren't doing anything, but pretty standard. Same thing here in Canada.
Perfect. Can heat pumps be used with radiators rather than mini splits?
They can. That is a more expensive system typically. So where you'd have an air to water heat pump, those are available, and some of them are quite good. Can be used, but not as common because it does tend to be more expensive and more complex.
Great. And just a comment from Jay in North Van, my Mitsubishi cold climate heat pump is rated for approximately minus 25 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, which would be way more than you need in North Van for sure.
All right, and then Jay just asked, was it May 2024 this year when the zero carbon step code came into effect?
Technically, the zero carbon step code isn't in effect right now unless your municipality has adopted it. But because of the step code procedures, we are at measure only already. So if you're getting a step code report, you will see, or your energy advisor should be filling out the step code part of it, and it should say required measure only unless your municipality has gone higher than that. And then they should be setting your proposed to whichever you reach. So if you're doing an all-electric system, you will see that your proposed house is EL4, the top step.
Great. Any document that gives good guidelines for designing Part 9 buildings?
Yeah, I mean there is a number actually. The one in terms of design, like in terms of look design, not my department. But you know, you paint it whatever color you want. But in terms of like you know, building science, wall assemblies, and stuff like that, and like heating systems, one of the ones I really like is the CHBA's Builder Manual. So this is the renovation version of it. There is a new home version of it as well. There is a BC specific version of it that's just about to be published, and you know, lots of great pictures, which are really nice. Who doesn't like it? Well, that didn't have pictures on it. Who doesn't like a picture book, right? It's written in fairly plain language, so you don't have to be like a building PhD scientist to read it and to you know, appreciate it. And it does. I mean, you see how thick it is. It is very comprehensive. So the BC specific version that's coming out soon. I'm not sure. I don't have a date. It has a whole. It covers like BC Energy Step Code and things like that. The other one is a national version, so it does cover, you know, national tier codes, which have the same background principles of it. But if you're looking for a resource for, you know, design in terms of like wall design, you know, equipment design, that sort of stuff, that'd be one of my first stops, particularly if I'm maybe embarking on, you know, a house build or something like that. And also nicely written in plain language, which is great.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I just recognized we have a couple minutes here left, so I'm just kind of quickly looking through the chat. Todd did put in the link to the Kelowna event there, so have a look. And then Casper asked, does zero carbon step code only consider the operational emissions for a home?
Yes, it does. It's operational only, and I recognize that's a small sliver of the pie there. We got to start somewhere. Embodied carbon, or the carbon that takes to make the materials, that is on the horizon. That's likely after 2030. Let's get through this first here, and once the building community stops freaking out about this, we can start talking about embodied emissions as well. There are studies ongoing right now at the national level to see how we might measure that. The real problem with embodied emissions is we haven't yet agreed on how we're going to measure it. And so that's really, really critical, right? You might see some companies measuring their carbon now, which is great. But unfortunately, some of them are assuming that all their materials magically show up at their shop. And so if that's the case, they look really good, but we have to account for the mine, the truck, the guy with the chainsaw, you know, all those things, right? So it is a pretty complex issue. Stay tuned. There'll be more coming, probably not in the next couple of years.
Great, thank you. And then we'll just close off. There are a couple questions here about solar. So with regards to concerns about grid capacity, could a home's peak load be offset with a solar array? And then is there any discussion of passive solar design in the code to reduce demand?
Yes, there is. So in terms of solar, so solar is not counted in the code. It is not counted in the energy step code, and it is not counted in the zero carbon step code either. So you cannot solar panel your way to success on these codes. However, you know, doesn't make it a bad idea. And we call, you know, so the energy step code does what we call load shaving, right? It shaves off the loads. Load shifting is when we have a battery and we say we take, you know, we're relying on the battery during peak times, and then we're shifting that load to a time when it is maybe not peak. So solar panels plus a little battery can have a huge effect on your peak load, and I think are a great idea. And certainly a lot of these solar panels are now cost effective, and we can do that. And a very small battery will go a long way to load shifting and keeping your peak flat. And BC Hydro has proposed, I'm not sure exactly what part of the where we are on that yet, but they have proposed a time of use rate so that at certain times of the day it would be more expensive to use electricity, and you would be able to take advantage of that then if you had that ability to shift your load throughout times of the day.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Mark. Everyone, we are at time. If you do have questions that we didn't get to today, please feel free to send me an email and I'll do my best to follow up, connect with Mark for some more details there. A reminder that the presentation slides, you should have a copy in your inbox already, but we will be sending them out again with a copy of today's recording too, and we'll have some more information there about upcoming workshops. We do have on the CEA Built Environment webpage a link to all of our upcoming events too, so have a look there. All right, thanks so much, Mark, and thanks everyone for attending. This is an incredible session. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
All right, take care, everyone.
See you.